And we're pleased to welcome back good friend of the show, best friend of the show, Prejean McGrady. She is an international speaker and author. Since 2007, she's been engaging audiences of all ages and sizes with theological truths and a unique blend of humor throughout North America and the UK. She's appeared on EWTN, Catholic TV, Radio Maria, and lots more. She joins us tonight to discuss the Ave Explorer series, Faith in Action, which focuses on issues surrounding Catholic social teaching. Welcome back to the Busted Halo Show, Prejean McGrady.
Thanks for having me, guys. Nice to see you.
we do see you on the little Zoom squares. I love your background. Nice bookcase.
Yeah.
Sun coming through the window.
Yeah. Michael Scott looking at the Eucharist, as we do. I don't know if you can see that all the way in the back from the office.
Wow.
Yeah, there's little Easter eggs back there if you pay attention. A Dundee on the wall. So, yeah.
Very nice. Well, you're in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. I am, yes, sir.
And I would imagine, yes, sir. You're very respectful in the South. Yeah. So, we don't say that up here. But I would imagine that you guys are at what sort of phase of returning to normal life? What's that?
So we're at phase 2.
Right.
I think that's like everything. Our churches are reopened 50%.
Oh, they are? Oh, okay.
Yes. I'm pregnant though, so I am not going out a whole lot. Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks. Yeah, 24 weeks. So my doctor has basically said, just stay home. And I'm a homebody. I really don't care. I'm fine with it. You can pretty much get anything delivered anyway. So
I will touch up my background of my Zoom calls, and I will be good to go.
Exactly. So I mean, I do get a little stir crazy from time to time, but it's basically back to normal around here.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
okay. So if one wasn't pregnant, could they go for a haircut, let's say?
Yeah, my husband got a haircut last week. That was actually his anniversary gift. Was he got 2 hours of free time? Just leave. Just go do what you want. Don't come back infected. And he went and got a haircut. He needed one desperately, and he goes to sports clips so he can watch sports, although sports don't really happen right now. It was some classic football. He came back
them
much
playing
happier.
The old stuff is still great for
exactly.
people.
That's what he said.
They don't care.
While she is smiling, the concept of sports clips, Christina is absolutely. Why would you watch?
It offends her that place would even exist.
I don't go there. He basically gets to sit in silence, and somebody cuts his hair, and he gets to watch ESPN Classic. He comes back rested. He has a beard now. He grew a beard.
All right. Yeah.
So apparently he also got a lather and a touch up on it. I don't know. He came back looking very handsome. Not that I didn't think that before, but when you spend 75 plus days in your house with somebody, you're just kind of
not everyone looked their best over quarantine either.
That's true. Exactly. So this was very needed for all of us.
You're only wearing sweatpants. It's not really our best look. So.
Yeah.
Prejean McGrady joins us here on the Busted Halo Show, and we're going to talk about the new episode, shall we call it, in the Ave Explorer series from Ave Maria Press. It's a video series, and this one is called Faith in Action, which focuses on issues surrounding Catholic social teaching. Mm-hmm. It's been said, Katie, of Catholic social teaching that it is one of the best kept secrets of the Catholic Church, and that's not a good thing, unintentionally. First of all, for people that have no clue what that jargon means, can you give us a quick little primer? What do we mean when we say social teaching?
So how does the church engage with the world and care for people, essentially? So people, places, things, nouns, right? We care for nouns within the church, and we look to advocate for justice, to help those most in need, and most essentially to recognize that the church doesn't just exist as this little private club where we worship in silence, but is instead a participation in the temporal world to really bring the gospel to life. And it's not a modernist modernist, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Oh, it's
trend.
Fad.
Trend. It's not a fad or a trend. It's actually something.
That was actually kind of trendy of you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's something that's essential to our faith.
Well, let's speak for a moment onto that last point, where there can be an easy dichotomy or even polemic, to be a bit more cynical, in our church these days, where you would have, let's say, a right and a left side of the church, and people might squarely put, all that social justice stuff. Or I've heard even people say, if you see, a sign on a parish that says we are socially justice minded, keep driving, go to the next parish. Why do you think that gets? Other than we don't have to psychologically break down who we are as humans.
I'd be happy to, but no.
If you could do that. But I think it's important to emphasize that if we're looking at the teachings of Jesus, it's not like, here's the things you should should do. Like Jesus doesn't say pray the rosary
Mhm.
and make sure you protest these sorts of things, but this other stuff that's fine or optional. This is mandated by our Lord.
It is, right? Like, I mean, he literally says he's going to determine if we get in to heaven, for lack of a better way to put it, if we feed the hungry, if we clothe the naked, if we take care of the sick, if we visit the imprisoned. The flip side is, like, he's going to look at some of us and say, you didn't do that, and you didn't care for me in the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed. So it very much is a mandate and is an invitation to really love people the way Jesus did. I think people don't like that, Father, and I don't think they like it because it's hard. And it requires we actually have to do something besides just sit around with a pipe and talk about how great theology is. Like, we actually have to go out and do the work,
Right.
and work is hard.
But
And
it
good.
also, what I think we're seeing recently, and this is a great time to be talking about this, it also, for many of us, requires acknowledging that there's people not in as good a place as me, and that is something wrong with the world. And as a person of faith, I am compelled to do something about that, not just be happy with, well, I've made mine. I mean, we hear even a lot of very devout people say, hey, I worked hard to get where I am, so I'm good. I'm going to go to church. I'll give to lots of organizations, but that's not gospel.
Right. Like, I mean, we have parable after parable of this. Jesus goes after the one who gets lost. He says that the woman who gave only 2 coins was more generous than the person who gave the 10 out of his 100, right? She gave from her first fruits. It's a command and an invitation, and really an opportunity to actually put into practice what we claim to believe. And I don't know, is it worth being a Christian if you're not willing to do that? Maybe, but I don't think it's going to be as fruitful. And I don't think you're going to be as fulfilled.
Ooh, Katie.
Sorry.
Nice. I like
It's
it.
a little blunt.
Yeah. No, that's why we like having you on. Well, and even to be more blunt and more pointed about the current situation, even for something as divisive, but also as basic to refer to today as something like the phrase and the movement of Black Lives Matter. So a lot of people's response to that is, well, wait a minute, all lives matter. Well, yeah, but we also see, and many of the things that you just pointed out, we see time and time again in the scriptures, God, not, a few people that might have gotten it wrong, but God saying things like, blessed are the poor, and Jesus singling out not everybody, but particularly people on the margins of society, and saying, hey, these people matter. Now, can you imagine, like, saying to Jesus, if you were someone who wasn't poor, hey, wait a minute, don't forget, rich people matter too. Nobody said that to Jesus, but we do seem to be pushing back, and I think, for a lot of obvious reasons, but we do seem to be pushing back about that. And I see direct parallels for what we see in a lot of the scriptures with something like, okay, yes, we believe that all children of God are created equal, but because indisputably a subset of us, children of God, have not been treated like that. That's not like somebody's opinion. I mean, we can roll some tape if you want, but indisputably have been treated like that, that it is not only okay, but there is precedent in scripture and tradition. Like, for instance, if we're talking about Catholic social teaching, maybe, Katie, I'll bat it back to you to talk about the phrase that we use as a preferential option for the poor. What does that mean to say a preferential option?
It means that they get our first fruits, right? It means that we focus on the care and we give attention to those who have struggled, those who need help, those who cry out for justice, and who need those of us in positions of privilege. And I'll say it because I'm white people who often find themselves in positions of privilege can no longer sit idly by and say, oh, well, that's not my problem. Because if we actually do believe all lives matter, then that means that the subset who's been told consistently that their life doesn't matter, or that their life is expendable, Black people in the instance that we're seeing in this world, well, then I can't say all lives matter if I don't also believe specifically that a Black life matters, and that our brothers and sisters in Christ have been systemically oppressed because this country literally began by owning them, and that we have to continue on to fight for justice and to give the preferential option to those who are struggling. Is that uncomfortable to talk about? Yeah, I've been reading White Fragility, the book that's like super popular right now, and it's been profoundly impactful for me to think, I guess I am pretty fragile when it comes to talking about these kinds of things.
Hmm.
But also, like, being told that I'm fragile means that I can then confront it, and I can help change the system, and I can help change some of the problems that seem to exist, and really answer that gospel mandate to love my brothers and sisters, the poor in spirit, the meek, the lowly, those who have been pushed down. Um, and I'm wandering at this point, but you're absolutely right. If my house is on fire and my neighbor comes across the street and tells the fireman, "Oh, well, you should come hose my house down," even though it's not on fire, like, that doesn't seem right. Like, my house is the one on fire. You need to take care of my house, not all of the other houses. At this moment, the lives of our Black brothers and sisters have been, they've been hurt, and they feel hurt as a community of people. Am I going to look at them and say, "Oh, sorry, my house is more important," even though it's not hurt right now? Like, no, of course not. That's stupid. And that's silly.
Or even equally stupid is to merely say, "Don't forget, my house should be important too on the day that it burns."
Right.
It's ridiculous to say that when somebody's house is on fire. And yet we're saying that.
We are. And I think it's because we're being confronted with such injustice. Nobody likes that. And nobody likes to think about the past that is shameful and things that are embarrassing in our nation's history. Nobody wants to confront that. But in the same way that when there's a scandal, we have to confront it and learn the truth so we can fix it and learn from our mistakes. At this moment, the scandal and egregiousness of racism is being shoved in our face. And if we are not strong enough to face that as a country, then we're doomed. And as Catholics, that's a call that we're being given right now.
Katie Prejean McGrady is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show. She's been working with Ave Maria Press on a video series called the Ave Explorer series, and the current one is called Faith in Action, which focuses on issues of Catholic social teaching. Obviously, Katie, we should point out the most obvious, particularly anyone who's watching this conversation on Zoom on the video. If you look at the little 4 squares here, there are 4 squares of not any people of color.
Mm-hmm.
But I would venture to say that most of us have had very powerful experiences on various sides or angles having to do with racism, or even been very powerfully impacted by people of color in our lives. I was very moved by what you have recently posted on Instagram about a story that happened to you at a Black Catholic church. Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So one of my dearest friends, Father Daniel Green, is a diocesan priest in New Orleans. New Orleans is one of the largest Black Catholic offices within their diocese, and he's the director of that office, and they specifically do parish ministry and diocesan ministry with people of color in the archdiocese. New Orleans is a dominantly Black community. So my husband and I were driving to Alabama to go film some stuff at EWTN. We stopped in New Orleans to visit Father Daniel. We were newlyweds. We turned it into a little weekend getaway, popped into his parish for Mass. It was my birthday. And I walked in.
It was everything.
It was everything. It was like the perfect storm of greatness. And I don't know. I think I knew that Father Daniel was at a traditionally Black parish, which in the South, and I think this is common everywhere, but there tend to be kind of, parishes that have a dominantly minority community.
Well, when I was a deacon preparing for a priesthood in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America, many of the parishes in Washington, D.C. are in fact that. Where I served as a deacon, I was myself and the pastor, and maybe a few other white faces, but other than that, predominantly African American.
And I knew that. We have a couple in Lake Charles, but New Orleans, of course, is much larger. Walked in, I don't know what I thought I should have known, but I was like, oh, I've never been in the minority in a room. Like I'm a quarter Puerto Rican, but I'm white, so like I don't. So I walk in, and we were a little thrown, being 2 of like 5 white people in the whole building. We sit down kind of close to the back, not because we were uncomfortable, but there's rules in parishes. Like, people have their spots, and we didn't want to take anybody's spot. And we wanted to see Father Daniel before we started.
So let's sit in the back.
Yeah, sit in the back, good Catholics. And this guy, this very tall man, comes up to us, and he introduces himself as Mr. Zion, and he says, "Come sit with me." And like, you don't tell a man named Mr. Zion, who's 6'5", that you're not sitting with him. Like, you just go and you sit with him. So we sat down next to him. He had a lovely singing voice. Mass began, and I've never experienced Mass like this before. You got amens in the homily. You got, there was an extra hymn after the sign of peace, because their choir was so incredible that like the praise and worship in this church. And then Mass ended. Father had everybody sit down. And like in my parish growing up, dominantly white, like people are out the door after communion. In this parish, it's like now the party really begins. Like we've worshiped and we've received, like now we can hang out. And Father introduced Tommy and I, my husband and I, to the parish, and said that when his family comes to town, and he called us family, he likes to do three things. He likes to pray, he likes to party, and he likes to eat. And so he said, we're going to pray over them. We're going to party together. We're going to sing Katie happy birthday. And then I'm taking him out to lunch. And so that's what they did. This community, like we stood in the center and this community gathered around us. They laid hands on us. They prayed for us. They sang me happy birthday. I am an introvert. I do not like being the center of attention in a crowd like that. So that was very humbling for me to stand there and have this, cacophony of voices sing happy birthday. And then we went to Commander's Palace and had a lovely lunch together. Of course, Father Daniel knows the owners.
That's delicious.
Yeah, of course, right?
Commander's Palace is up there on the list.
Yeah,
Well
it was
done.
a lovely day. And when we were sitting at lunch, I told him, I said, I go all over the country and am in parishes, and I've never been in a parish community that welcoming and that loving. Can you tell me what you're doing? And he said, oh, I haven't been there very long. We're Black Catholics, and Black Catholics are used to being on the outside. We're used to being shoved aside. And we want to make sure that anybody that comes doesn't ever have to feel that way. And it was profound to me, because then I started thinking, if some of those Black men and women had shown up at my parish on Sunday, they would not have been welcomed the same way. They wouldn't have been, shoved to the side, I don't think, or they wouldn't have been told to leave, but like nobody would have sang to them or prayed with them or probably even asked them their name, because that's just not the reality in my parish, even though I've always found it to be a very welcoming place. And it struck me that even though there were such distinct differences as skin color, there was actually something uniting us, which was this Catholic faith and this love of worship and prayer together. And I loved it. I loved the community. I loved the people. We go back there anytime we're in New Orleans. It's kind of my adopted parish. Father Daniel's baptizing this baby in the future. And I told him I kind of want to come do it there, but Sacramental records, we need them on file over here, but they're just beautiful
even if the
people.
baby's already baptized, I get the sense they're gonna make a big
It's
deal
something.
out of it.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have a party of some sort, and like we're still in touch with Mr. Zion. Like I get an email from him every now and then, and he like anytime he'll probably watch this interview because I think he has like a Google alert for my name. Like the man will email me anytime he sees that I've done something in the Catholic world. We loved them, and they loved us, and that was huge for us. It was huge.
So I suppose the obvious question I want to ask, or us discuss, not a question for you per se, but what do we learn from this? And one of the things that I take away from that whole story is that last part that you just said, it should be our Catholicness that unites us regardless of what goes on in the rest of our lives, regardless of what cable news channel we watch, regardless of who we voted for, regardless of how we think things should be solved, that still seems to be predominant in some communities. I don't see that a lot on the larger stage, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's much easier to just kind of stay within the borders that we've somehow created for ourselves. I don't even know what language to use that doesn't sound somehow uncomfortable, but it's easier to not try with people that look differently than you, or that might have different life experiences than you. And it's easier to think, well, I have nothing to learn from them, and they probably have nothing to learn from me. And that's just not been my experience. And I think that the Lord really invites us to that.
Well, okay. And so I suppose I should be fair. If we're on some other channel, I'd be a little devil's advocate. It's like, well, okay, so they did something nice for you. I mean, how did that change you? What has that motivated you to do?
So quite honestly, that conversation that I kind of had with myself, would these Black men and women have been as welcome in my traditionally white parish? It struck me that I am maybe accusing my parish of being unwelcoming, but not thinking, well, am I being unwelcoming? Or am I going out of my way to make sure that somebody of any race, of any background, who comes into my church that doesn't look like I've ever seen them before, am I actually reaching out to them and saying, hey, we're happy you're here. Do you know where you want to sit? We want to come to brunch with my family afterwards. It forced me to think, if somebody were to come into my church, somebody were to come into my home, introduce themselves to my child, am I going to be as joyful a witness to the gospel to them as these wonderful people were to us? I haven't always done that well, but it definitely forced me to think about that. And that's, I mean, this conversation that's happening in our country right now, systemic change has to happen. There have to be legislative things that happen to make a difference in the lives of people who have been oppressed. But there's also a major heart change that has to happen, and conversion of the way we think and the way we treat one another. And I think that's the moment that many of us are confronting right now.
Well, and I've been wanting to rely not only on personal stories like yours, which I think that speaks to people at the heart, maybe for some people better than some, document or encyclical, but there's a lot that our church has had to say about that. The other day when I was on CNN, I quoted "Open Wide Our Hearts," the bishop, the American bishop's document from 2018 about racism, and they talked about the history of racism in our country. They kind of singled out 3 subgroups: African Americans, Indigenous peoples, and then Hispanics and Latinos, and talked about how that's worked, and also, where do we go from here? What would you say, particularly if we're talking about the Faith in Action series from Ave Explorers, what are some elements of Catholic social teaching that, let's say, somebody is, and I think this maybe is how it often happens, if somebody just heard your story and their heart's touched and they go, okay, it sounds like they're saying that there's some stuff that I've never heard of or never read that our church actually teaches about this. What's a good place to start?
Yeah. So with this Ave Explorers Faith in Action series, we actually compiled a resource page that has articles, videos, a syllabus, essentially, of how to get started in learning about Catholic social teaching, in addition to the content that we've created. So the articles, the videos, the podcasts that we're producing. One of the things that my Black, Indigenous, people of color friends, right, that little phrase, that BIPOC that's floating around, my friends and people in that community have shared with me, is that phrase, and I'm sure you have talked about it on the show, do the work, right? Google, read, learn, listen. For me, one of the books that I've been working my way through has been Stamped from the Beginning, kind of the definitive history of racist ideologies in this country. And it totally has re-taught me things that I never knew before about how this country was founded and the way things happened. That has been illuminating to learn the story. That's on our resource list, as well as it just came out today, actually, a collaboration with some Black historians and theologians, this Black Catholic syllabus. So writings and teachings and things that have been created by the Black Catholic Church that many white Catholics don't even know about because we just haven't paid attention to that. That's the kind of work that needs to be done. I think beyond that, doing the work, there's also prayer, right? Jesus Christ and the power of Christ is real. And if we're not taking to prayer a desire for hearts to be changed, our own included, then we're just turning this into a social project. And it's not just a social project. It's a transformation of the body of Christ. And that's where it has to begin. And that's really where it's going to take root.
Well, those resources you mentioned, I'm sure, are already up on our radio blog, bustedhalo.com/radio. I'm fairly sure, am I correct, Christina Ambrosino?
You are correct.
All right. So everything that Katie was just talking about, you don't have to worry about, well, what's her website? I don't know. Just the same thing I always say, bustedhalo.com/radio. We've got links to that. Thank you for being a part of that. And I really was very moved by your story. And I will say that I absolutely had a very similar experience with the Black Catholic Church for my year that I was a deacon in Washington, D.C. Certainly also one of the most welcoming communities I've ever seen people be welcome to others. Also for me and for, a cadre of seminarians that would come through every year and it'd be a new one. And okay, here's this guy who's kind of gangly and doesn't get our community. Welcome. All right. Hi, here you go. Big hugs and whatnot. It was the only time, I will say, that I've ever sang the Exultet. I mean, it's the only time I sort of had to because I was a deacon, but the woman who was in charge of the choir there, and it was a traditional kind of Black choir where they would wear the robes and they would sort of walk down the aisle in rhythm and all that. And she was this tiny little person who had so much energy to direct this choir. She got more out of me in terms of kind of training me, not just necessarily how to sing or how to use my voice, but to really to pray it aloud for people and to have that kind of enthusiasm and energy. And boy, we need more of that.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Katie Prejean McGrady, always great to have you along. God bless you on that. We may not talk to you before the little baby.
End of September. Pray for Claire.
I'm an end of September baby.
Oh, there you go. September 27th is our due date right now.
Oh, 30th of May. So very close. All right.
So Claire Ann, say a prayer for her.
Very Catholic.
Yeah, very much so. Oh, yeah. I mean, come on. You see the background.
Yeah, you see that coming.
Yeah.
See the background. I'm seeing The Office. That's what I'm seeing. Katie, thank you.
Thank you, guys.